Hi, welcome to Actualol. These are the board games I've been playing lately. Adventure Island is a cooperative game that plays on the trope of being on a deserted island trying to survive. So think Robinson Crusoe or the TV series Lost. You are there, you're trying to find food, you're trying to find shelter or build shelters, and you're exploring the island and finding things along the way. And it does it in a campaign style game. Also has these cool packs that you unlock. So you would open up these card packs to introduce new elements to the game as you play. But it does it in a really family-friendly way. The gameplay is incredibly simple. The way it works is you take your character to put it on a card to take an action. So for example, this one here, building a shelter, you'd have to put some wood there, and then you would have to do a skill check, checking your skill. So you'd roll as much dice as your character has in their skill, and you're trying to hit the color that's on here. Some colors are much easier to hit than others. There's definitely some cooperation in terms of, oh, you do that, okay, I'll get the wood to help you build the shelter. I'll be the person collecting the food this day because we all need to eat or otherwise we're gonna get fatigued. And you lose the game if you get fatigued, which is basically like health. And so if one of the characters dies, then you're gonna lose. It starts off very simply. You've got the beach, you can search for food, you can build a shelter, or you can explore your surroundings. But then it really expands and this table can become full of all the different places you explore. And each chapter you'll play in the campaign will introduce slightly different things, or you'll get further into the island. So if you go to the beach here, you will just draw a flotsam card, which might be wood, which is great for building shelters, but it might be other things like coconuts, which would be some food. So there's a real exploration feel to it because you're finding new things every time you play, but also just during the game, you don't know what you're gonna get. And it's the same if you explore your surroundings here, you'll be revealing new places and new parts of the island. So I don't want to spoil it for you because I think a big part of the game is exploring it and finding it as you go. And I think it has a very simple story, a very classic story, but it tells it in a nice way and it tells it through your discovery of this island. It's not force-feeding you a story, you are very much finding new things. And one of the interesting things I liked about the game is that it plays on real-world logic to some extent. It doesn't have the classic cooperative resource puzzle that you might find in like Pandemic or Robinson Crusoe, where you're really trying to work together. How can we definitely survive this turn? How can we best use our resources? There is a little bit of that, but because there's dice, there's some luck involved, and you definitely are playing to your character's strengths. But there's also a sense of, okay, we need to find this thing. Which is the best direction to head, do we think, to find what we need? And that I really like that because it reminds me of playing escape room games, and it also makes you feel a bit more part of this world because you're on an island and maybe you're trying to find food or you're trying to find another human. Where might you find them? Where would be the best place to go? And you kind of have to gamble and take a risk on the decision that you make. There's definitely not easy. The dice certainly make it hard, and trying to stop being fatigued and make sure you have enough food keeps it a challenging game. I don't think it has the strategic depth that a real core gamer would necessarily look for, but I really enjoyed playing through the campaign and experiencing it. It's kind of like you play it once and then I felt like I didn't really need to experience I wouldn't necessarily play through the whole campaign again, but there are five games in the campaign. It certainly would be replayable, but I think once you've explored it, it loses some of that reveal nature of it. I think this one would be great for families, if you like escape room games, or if you're trying to get your kids into board games and you want something that is very simple for them to learn. There's really no rules up front, but the cards will kind of introduce new things. I really like that method of kind of teaching a game. And if you're trying to get them into cooperative games, I think this one does a really good job of introducing it. It's got nice artwork and just a really approachable theme. That is Adventure Island. Element is an abstract game that has some interesting twists on the genre. If you play 2 players, you are trying to trap your opponent on this board, and every turn you're going to be drawing stones out of this big bag that represent one of the 4 elements. This player here is trapped, so it cannot move, surrounded on all sides, and therefore the other player has won the game in this slightly ridiculous situation. The way it works is that on your turn, you can move once, and then you could draw 4 stones out of the bag. Or you could move twice and only draw 3 stones, and so on. So you can decide maybe how much you want to move, and you can move 1 space in any direction. And then you'll be drawing out stones, so there's a fair amount of luck involved in terms of hoping to get the stones that you want. And what's really interesting about the game is that each of the elements works in a slightly different way that has a bit of theme to it. So the way that fire works is that if there's some fire already on the board and I was to place a fire stone next to it and add to it, it would spread. And so then some fire would be placed free from the bag on the opposite side of where it was placed. So it adds and fire just grows and grows and grows. So very easy to understand because it fits the idea of fire. Then you've got water. Water moves in rivers. So if I was to add to a straight line of water here, the river now has to move, and it moves the number of spaces of the river. So this river is made up of 3 stones, so it now moves 3 spaces. So it goes 1, 2, 3, something like that. It's really interesting because you have to watch out for where there is water. It might not be that near you, but if somebody can then add to it and then get that river moving right towards you, it can wrap around you. So it has, I really like the movement of the river in this game. It just has a interesting dynamic that I haven't really sort of seen in another game. Then you've got wind. Wind actually can't trap you on its own, and it helps you move. So you get a free action, you can jump over wind. So there's 2 wind stones here, and you can just jump here. But if there is a spot here so that you couldn't move there, you are now trapped on this side by that wind because there's no way that you could jump over, you couldn't jump into this spot. So if you're up against the side of the board can also trap you, and so having a wind here means that you are trapped on this side at least. And then finally you've got earth. Earth is pretty simple, you cannot move through it. And then you can turn earth into mountains by placing one on top of another. And then anything adjacent to that mountain becomes a mountain range, and you cannot move even diagonally through a mountain range, and it can never be removed from the board because all the other pieces can be removed. On the back of the rule book, you've got the rule of replacement. So earth can be placed onto water to get rid of the water. Water can obviously put out fire. Fire can remove wind, and wind can remove earth. And so that's another interesting thing to think about. As this board expands, how can you make yourself safe? Element is unlike any other abstract game I've played. It has a little more rules than you'd expect from an abstract game. I wouldn't say that it's overwhelming in any stretch, but you just have to learn how each of the elements work, and there are a few exceptions as to how things move. The other thing I found is just that I wouldn't say that I can look ahead necessarily as well as you can in a simpler abstract game, because there's 4 different things going on in the way that the stones work. It can just be hard to visualize the future of plays, and you will often get caught and trapped and lose the game in a way that you weren't expecting because there's just so much on that board and you can't visualize how it will all play out. It's interesting deciding whether to focus on yourself or on the other player, and that decision of how many spaces you move versus how many stones you take. I personally find it more fun to take stones because I think they have just a more interesting impact on the game, but I would imagine that sometimes it's way more in your interest to take 3 movement and really get out of harm's way. I think that Element is really interesting abstract game that I've enjoyed playing. It doesn't quite rank up there with my favorites like Onitama, for example. But if you're into abstract games and you can handle a little bit of luck with the drawing the stones from the bag and a few more rules than you might expect, I think it's definitely got some excitement to it and isn't that hard to get to grips with. So yeah, that is Element. Farben is an interesting storytelling game with a memory element where every round, one person will pick a topic for that round. So let's say it's selfishness, or it might be food or fun. You would just draw a card and you pick which side you're going to go with. And then everyone will pick a color that they want to tell a story about that represents that. So generally, when we were playing the game, it was stories about ourselves, but it could be anything really. What you're trying to do is get the other players to remember your color. And so you're trying to tell a story that is memorable, but also intrinsically linked to the color that you've picked. So everyone will pick a color face down from this selection of all the colors. There's also a multicolored one. And so you might be like telling a story about the time you ate some food and then you were sick and it was yellow and it got everywhere. I don't know. When it comes to my turn, I would reveal it, tell the story, and then it would be put face down and there would be a stack of them under this food card. Then you'd play multiple rounds, and then at the end, once you've played a certain number of rounds, you will be trying to guess what colors were played that round and which player played which color. And it's fascinating how it works. Firstly, I love that it inspires you to tell stories. You really get to know your friends. You're having to try to stand out. Really, if you want to win the game, you need to be telling interesting stuff and really hooking people. Often, we found not necessarily that we weren't always telling stories, but we might be, for example, saying something a bit more that's like a truth about ourselves. So if the card is fun, you might sort of say, oh, for me, like the most fun I've ever had is watching football, and my favorite team is Manchester United, and so their kit is in red. Something like that. You might relate to something about yourself that maybe your friends know, or maybe they don't, maybe you're revealing for the first time. That conversation starter that the game creates is really nice, and if you're playing it with friends or if you're playing it with people that you don't know, you're learning about them, and I found that aspect just really cool about the game. As the game goes on, these colors are now stuck, so you're having to be more creative in the ideas that you go with or the stories that you tell, because you don't have the full array of colors available to you, and you really having to get creative. So I think that's really cool. And then when it comes to it at the end of the game, trying to remember the other players, you will pick a stack and assign it to someone else, and they will then have to go through and remember which color for who. And it's fascinating how some things were easy to remember and some things are impossible, and some stories just really stick in your mind with that color attached. Some stories, you know what the story they told in relation to selfishness, but you have no idea what the color was in relation to that. Often you find that friends would pick the same color, or they would come up with stories or relations to that color that have very similar kind of basis, and that's really interesting to see those similarities. And then some friends will just do something really obscure and weird, and you then have no chance of remembering it later on. So the box and the cards, it's not that appealing of a game to look at. It's kind of small. It's probably flown under the radar, but I think there's an interesting game in here, and I think if you like that kind of social experience where you're learning about each other, it definitely provokes some really interesting stuff. I found that it went on a bit long for what I would prefer, just because if you're playing, I think it was something like 10 rounds, and you're all telling stories, and then you're all having to remember things, that memory element at the end can definitely take a while, as people, they really want to get it right, and they're really having to think about it. One of the nice things is that actually when you're trying to remember, you can ask the player for a clue, and if you get it right off the clue, you get less points, but it just means that it's not completely hopeless, and often they'll just say like one word and it will get you a bit closer. So don't overlook this game. I think it's a really neat, interesting idea that I had a lot of fun with. That is Farben. Gangchon Clever is a roll and write game that was nominated for the Kenner Spiel des Jahres. It's designed by Wolfgang Worsch, who designed The Mind. So I was definitely excited to try it. Heard a lot of people talking about it. It's very simple. You are rolling dice on your turn. Then you will pick a dice for that round. Let's say I pick this one yellow. I will write something off on my sheet. And then I can roll again any dice that I haven't had to set aside. If I roll again and then take this 5 purple, anything below that 5 now has to go on this silver platter. I'm offering it to the other players. It's not mine anymore. I can take 3 dice on my turn, so I get a chance to roll one more time. And I can take one of these. So if I wanted to be difficult for the other players, I could take this 1 so that they wouldn't get the 3. But if I took the 3, they would then get the 1. And so I am trying to cross off things on my sheet to get loads of points. There's no theme to this game. It's really about just scoring the most points and trying to work off combos. It's definitely got a satisfying feel to the gameplay. So if I was to go through the parts of it, if you were to take a yellow die, say this 4, you would cross off the 4 in the yellow section, and you're trying to create rows and columns. The rows will give you the ability to cross off other aspects of the sheet, and that's really common in this game. It allows you to kind of chain your moves. So if you can finish off that, then that allows you to add to that. So then that might allow you to finish off that, and that's where the interesting gameplay lies, is in trying to be efficient and get things to combo. But if you finish columns in the yellow section, you're going to get loads of points at the end of the game. The blue section works in a similar way, except the more spots you cross off in the blue section, the more points you get. So if you cross off all 11 squares, you're going to get 56 points. The orange and the purple are interesting because at the end of the game, you just score points equal to the numbers in them. So you just add them up. So really, you want to be filling them up with 6s. And orange, that kind of works. Whereas in purple, the number always has to be bigger. So if you placed like a 5 here, you can't place any number except a 6 here because it has to be greater than. Then when you hit a 6, it resets and you can start again from 1, because you don't really want to be putting 1s down there because 1s aren't going to be worth much when you add it all up. But if you go further up these, again, you're getting these bonuses. Here you get an extra re-roll. Here you get to cross off a blue section, and it's the same on all of these. So generally what you want to do is focus on, I don't know, I'm not that great at this game, but let's say maybe 2 or 3 sections. If you try to do all of them, I feel like it just wouldn't really work. And because the further in you get on something, you're really going to start to reap benefits from it that are going to affect other sections. Of course, it is good to get points in all of them, ideally, because if you get these little fox symbols, you're going to score your lowest scoring section again. So you're going to get the points from them again. There's no doubt that Gangchon Clever is a wonderfully designed, thinky roll and write game, and I can see why everybody loves it. And I like it, but I don't love it, partly because it's a little abstract, but mostly because it can be a bit slow. Even with 2 players, you are having to wait for that other player to draft a dice. And I generally lean towards roll and write games where you all use the same dice and you don't draft dice, because it just slows it down, and I don't really feel like the experience of a roll and write game is so wonderfully valuable that I can withstand the downtime that you get with these things. All of the time, the other players can't do anything. They can be looking at this dice here, but they can't write anything down because they don't know what else might be available to them. So they do nothing. They have no useful strategic thinking, no planning. They are just waiting for their turn to come around. And so I would then maybe do that re-roll, take another dice. Oh, okay, those are now available. And eventually, when I've placed all 3 and I've decided maybe where to cross it off, now these dice are available to them and they can pick one of them. And then it's their turn and I have to wait. I like games for social experiences. Roll and write games aren't especially interactive, but when you're all moving and playing at the same time, it sweeps me up into it and I enjoy it. And with something like this, there was just a bit too much waiting. So I think the game is brilliantly designed. I totally get why everyone loves it. It's not for my collection, but that doesn't mean it isn't for yours. That is Gangchon Clever. Funky Chicken is from Happy Planet Games, who made Happy Salmon. Happy Salmon is just a wonderfully chaotic, energetic game that I love having in my collection. If you haven't ever seen it being played, check out my top 10 Christmas gifts video. It's a game that is great for kids and it plays in like a minute and it just gives you that burst of energy. It's a party game, family game, kids game. And the way Happy Salmon works is that you all have a deck of identical cards that's shuffled up. You've got a card and it's forcing you to do an action that you're trying to find a pair with in the group. So you play with maybe 6 people and you'll be saying fist bump, or high five. And then you find someone that also has the same card as you. You do a high five, you get rid of that card, and then you're through your deck. And also in the game, there's this Happy Salmon, which is like doing like this. Happy Salmon is wonderful. Funky Chicken is heavily inspired by that. It works in exactly the same way, but instead of doing high fives and that, you're doing more like dance moves. So, for example, you've got a spin, which is where you would find a partner and just spin around on the spot. So you don't interact with the other person there. You would do a swing, which is where you grab them by the hook of your arm and you spin around with each other and go back to your original place. Then you've got a bump, which is where you would like bump them on the hip. So you kind of like bump them like that. And then finally, you've got the Funky Chicken, which is where you do that and you say, so funky. And there's no doubt that Funky Chicken is even more kind of silly than Happy Salmon, partly because you have to say so funky, partly because you're having to kind of dance with each other. So I think it requires like a little bit more bravery from the players, or you've got to be a little bit brave to bring it out. But I think then that also means that especially kids are probably going to love this one even more, or people that like to dance. I've had fun with Funky Chicken. I think it's kind of exactly what it says on the tin. I don't think that it's as good as Happy Salmon, and I think there's just something, I prefer there's more interaction in Happy Salmon. Like the spin, I think is just a bit of a dud card. I really like the swinging around because it reminds me of dancing to Cotton Eye Joe in the 90s. The bump is okay, but you can probably sort of maybe hurt each other. And then the Funky Chicken, again, a little bit like the spin. It's funny because you're having to say so funky and you feel like a bit of an idiot. But again, there's no interaction with each other. And there's something so satisfying in Happy Salmon about high-fiving and fist bumping. It's just got that reciprocation. So yeah, I still would highly recommend Funky Chicken if you like the sound of it. And if you like Happy Salmon, but you just want something else to try. I think it's really cool. And I think you kind of know already whether it's going to be one for you. That is Funky Chicken. Abracazam is a party game, kids game, where you are having to use a magic wand to try and draw a shape that the other players are going to guess. So in the middle of the table, you've got all these different shapes. If it's your turn, you take the wand, you take one of these cards in secret, you look at the shape, and then you draw it. And you can draw it as many times as you like until somebody guesses it. Everyone gets one guess, and so they're shouting out the words on it. And in this instance, it was lupus that I just did. And then they get that card and it's going to count as a point. But it also casts a spell on them that then changes how they then play their turn the next time it comes to them. So, for example, you have been turned into a werewolf. Cast your spell with your fist and the wand wedged between your forefinger and your middle finger, like that. So generally, these cards are going to make it harder. There's going to be things like where you have to jump up. You have to do it between your armpit, and it's got that silly vibe to it. We had fun with this one. It's very simple. I can imagine kids loving it. It's probably a great gift for Harry Potter enthusiasts. There's different decks that give you slightly different challenges. So there's like 4 or 5 different colors. I like that the cards, they're sort of written in mirror image, so you would just look at it. This looks different to the card that's on the table. So yeah, very, very simple, very appealing. Not going to stay in my collection, but I think if you played a lot with kids and they liked casting spells, I think having those extra challenges, I've played games like this before, but having those extra challenges that just make it a bit sillier and a bit different every time you play is a really nice twist. That is Abracazam. This is Crazy Eggs, which is a kids game that comes in an egg box. It's designed by Roberto Fraga, who designed Captain Sonar and Dr. Eureka, and that's why I wanted to try it out. It's actually originally out a while ago called Dancing Eggs, I think. It's a dexterity game with a bit of speed to it, where you roll a dice and everyone has to do the action, and you're trying to be the first one for most of these. So this is be the first person to grab this dice, be the first person to do a cock-a-doodle-doo noise, be the first person to do like a disco pose, be the first person to grab this egg. This is the egg that's up for grabs this round. Then this one is if you're the last person, you might lose something. So you have to put a finger on your lips or you have to put your hand on the egg. If you win that round, you get the egg and you have to place it on your person. You roll this die and it shows you where you've got to place it. So it might be here, it might be under your chin, it might be in your elbow, it might be between your knees and under your armpit. So as the game goes on, you're trying to get a number of these to win the game and you're trying to hold them whilst you're doing the rest of the game. What we found as adults is that it wasn't that challenging, a dexterity thing, especially as you don't need that many eggs to win the game. And unfortunately, there's not that many eggs to go around. So you're only ever really sort of having to keep a few of them. And it's just not that hard to keep going. But maybe for kids, it would be a lot harder. I haven't played this one with kids. There is a cool extra heavier egg, which is going to be harder for you to hold on to. So it's nice that that's in there, but there's only one of them. To be honest, most of the game in terms of whether you're going to win is just coming down to that speed element of grabbing the thing or doing the thing faster than the other players. And I've got games with much more interesting speed aspects than this one. And so I was interested in it for the dexterity challenge, and it just turned out that the dexterity challenge wasn't that great for adults. But I haven't played it with kids. It's obviously got a really cool visual aesthetic and idea, so maybe kids are going to love it. That is Crazy Eggs. Those are the board games I've been playing lately. I'll put links to where you can buy them in the description below. I'm Jon Purkis. Thanks for watching.